I wasn't just worried about the beasts or looters, you see. What I truly feared was that I may be struck by a vision at some point during this journey. Not only would it be immediately obvious to everyone that I was experiencing one, as I was the center of attention of the entire group as they followed me, but it would be actively dangerous. If we were to be attacked by human or beast alike, and I were to fall into a trance, I would be totally defenseless. I could be kidnapped, or killed, or maybe even something worse. And then there was the issue of the accursed eye, that while I could not see, I was now acutely aware of its existence as it constantly looked around, almost feeling like a light tugging on my side. If anyone were to discover that, serious issues would almost certainly arise. And it was this frustration and fear that kept me company as we continued to walk, past debris and wreckage that seemed to stretch on for eternity. This walk, that was supposed to be a mere few hours, was looking as though it was going to turn into an all-day excursion. This was due not only to the previously mentioned issues, but also to the fact that the roads were much worse than initially expected. At one point, we had to turn around entirely because of a collapsed building blocking the road, costing us at least half an hour. And yet, despite the carnage, we met very few people, and not a single beast. It was strange, and more than a little worrying. It felt as though the city itself was watching us every step of the way, waiting to see what we would do. We were about 3/4 of the way there when I sent Hagar to go check on everyone, wanting to see how the group was holding up. She came back with news that did not improve my mood. The group in general had slowed down from the already snail's pace that we had been going to a bear crawl, and some of the more elderly of the group were essentially on the verge of collapse. I hung my head in defeat, knowing that I had to do what I had so desperately been trying to avoid. We were so close, but looking back I could see that what Hagar had told me held true. Everyone was in a bad way. The constant vigilance and difficult terrain had taken its toll on the weak and frail. And thus I called out to the group, telling them we would be taking an hour-long break here, no more and no less. I made it abundantly clear we would be at the building before sundown, something nobody refuted. Perhaps they agreed it was the best course of action. Perhaps they were simply too tired. I really didn't care. Accepting defeat, I sat a short distance away from the crowd, eating a bit of the meat from my backpack. I made sure to consume it in such a way that they could not see what it was that I was eating, so as to not raise questions that I did not particularly feel like answering. When I had declared that we would be taking food from nearby stores shortly after deciding that we would be heading to the apartment building, there had been relief. Clearly, nobody liked eating the meat of dubious origin, of which I refused to explain, much to their chagrin. While they were willing to do what they had to do for survival, they would much prefer food with labels and wrappers. Even now, I saw several of my group coming out from a nearby abandoned grocery store carrying fresh fruits and vegetables to cheers from the crowd. Those were things that once fetched a high price, something I knew all too well. So then, if we were no longer required to eat that twisted and grisly meat, why did our wonderful leader continue to do so? That was not something I particularly wished to answer, and thus I kept my distance. I shuddered as it slid down my throat, feeling it settle heavily in my stomach. I narrowed my eyes and gritted my teeth as I felt the aberration in my side begin to move frantically, as though reacting to the unnatural meat. I quivered as I felt bile rise in my throat, but managed to keep it down. I would do it for the abilities, for the visions. That being said, I had not received any visions since the one of the death-like man in the basement, and I had not heard voices for even longer. Perhaps they were becoming less common as time went on, but it had only been about a day. I may be jumping to conclusions. I stared down at the meat in my hand, wondering if what I was doing was wise. I ran down the hospital corridor, fear turning my veins to ice. I could hear the thing behind me, grasping and devouring anything that moved. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I didn't want to meet it. The lights flickered and faded, and I found myself stumbling, slamming into a gurney and falling to the floor, coughing and panting, barely able to breathe. Feet slammed down around me, kicking me and making it impossible to get up, so I pulled myself underneath the gurney, hoping to find some shelter there. I screwed my eyes shut and tried to make myself as small as possible, hoping that all of this would just go away and that I would wake up back in my own bed, not the hospital one, and Mom would come in to tell me to get ready for school. I made a silent promise that as long as nothing happened to me, I would study my algebra, I swear, and I would admit to Mom that I was the one who had broken her favorite vase, not the dog, and there would be no more playing around at the junkyard, which is what got me into this mess in the very first place. If I had never cut myself on that nail, I wouldn't have had to be in this stupid hospital in the first place. Frickin' tetanitis. I opened my eyes, just to a squint, and saw a pair of people limping down the hall, making the turn and nearly slamming into the very gurney that I was hiding under. "Where is the exit to this goddamn place?" I heard a woman growl, and I peeked out from my hiding place to get a better look at them. One was a woman, presumably the one I just heard talking, dark-skinned and carrying a briefcase. She had bandages around her leg, something that was clearly slowing her down. Supporting her was a man, tall, pale, and gaunt, with a bit of stubble peppering his face. His dark coat almost seemed to swallow both of them, and he wore a face of grim determination. Neither of them seemed to notice me. I nearly called out to them, to beg for their help to get me out of here, and indeed I stretched out a hand and nearly grabbed onto the man's coat, before they abruptly moved forward, going around the gurney and once again leaving me alone. I pulled my hand back underneath the gurney and once again tried to make myself as small as possible. The power suddenly cut out for good this time, casting everything into darkness, and I screamed in fear, terrified of the inky blackness that suddenly surrounded me. But through it, I smelled something new. It was a blessing, helping to calm my nerves, to relax. It was the smell of my mother cooking my favorite meal, tuna fish casserole. I could almost see it being placed down in front of me, and could almost taste it as I dug into the delicious warmth of the noodles. My breathing slowly started to calm as I took in the smell, and for the first time since this began, I felt some semblance of calm. I heard the sound of wet flesh being dragged down the hall, but I chose to ignore it, instead immersing myself even further into the smell. I felt the grasping of hands around my body, but I instead thought of my mother's face as it was basked in the warm glow from the afternoon sun. I even ignored the feeling of being lifted up, instead choosing to concentrate on the tuna casserole that I could almost taste. It wasn't until I felt the bizarre sensation of being swallowed that I finally opened my eyes, and it was in that moment that I saw the mistake I had made. But it was far too late now, and so I closed my eyes again, and went into the waiting arms of my mother, so that she may hold me. "Ma'am? Ma'am?" I snapped my eyes open to find Hagar hovering over me, shaking my shoulder. I quickly pushed her off of me and stood up, startling her backwards. "Don't touch me!" I hissed, and her eyes widened as she backed up even further, nearly tripping over her own feet. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just that you fell asleep and the hour had passed and I figured you would want to get moving, so I thought that maybe it would be best to wake you, but you're right, I shouldn't have disturbed you, and I held up my hand, cutting her off. I pinched my nose, trying to quickly pull myself together. Just when I had started to think about how the visions were fading, I was of course overwhelmed with one. Thankfully, it seems that they all had thought I simply fell asleep. I quickly tried to marshal my thoughts, even as I looked around to see how everyone was doing. I recognized the man from my vision. Oh yes, indeed. He was the very same person from the other vision, the one on the night the beasts attacked, the one standing at the top of the basement stairs. The woman, however, was new. What did it all mean? What was it trying to tell me? I decided that I would have to figure that out later, once we were safe inside the apartment building. For now, I would have to shove it aside and focus on the here and now. "Alright, everyone! You've had your hour. Let's get moving, I suddenly shouted, surprising the group and sending Hagar scrambling for her stuff as to not get left behind. I tapped my foot impatiently as everyone got everything together, glancing down the street both ways to make sure we weren't being snuck up on. The vision had put me on edge, and with it, my patience for delays had worn out. Even as I was trying to put it out of my mind and focus, I kept thinking about it. Why did the man reappear? Why the hospital? Why do I always die at the end of them? These questions I had no answers for built up in my head until I felt like my skull might explode, until finally, after what felt like an eternity, we were able to get moving. With the ability to focus on only putting one foot in front of the other, I was able to hold myself together. Barely. Step. 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 Look out for that knocked over sign. Step. Where are the beasts? Why are we not being attacked right now? Step. Who is that man? Step. Take this turn here. Step. Someone just tripped, and now everyone needs to stop for some reason. Step. There's an eyeball growing out of the side of my stomach. Step. Maybe I am going insane. Step. Finally, after what felt like far too long, we were on the correct street. Just down the way I could see my old apartment, in all of its graffitied glory. I breathed a sigh of relief that it hadn't been consumed in a fire or destroyed in some other way, as I was not sure what I would do if that had happened. It would have been deeply embarrassing. There it is, everyone! We're almost there! I shouted to the crowd, which responded with a tired cheer. It seemed like everyone was ready to call it a day. We began to make our way to it, the end being in sight re-energizing us. But something was wrong. It was in the air. There was an electricity that everyone could feel. People glanced around nervously, clearly wanting to slow down, but I pushed forward regardless. I would not back down, not this close to the end. And they followed, as I knew they would. We heard it before we saw it. A thumping noise echoing down the street. The ground seemed to tremble with each noise, and it was clear that something big was approaching. I had a sneaking suspicion on what it could be, and I knew it would not be friendly. Come on! Get to the building! We'll be safe in there! I yelled, leading the charge as I broke into a sprint. I heard the crowd behind me pick up speed as well, nobody wanting to be the last one in. I dodged around a destroyed car, sparing a glance back at everyone. Most of them were somewhat keeping pace, but several had fallen behind, mostly the sick and elderly, those that had been delaying us the entire way. But it was what was behind them that nearly froze me in place, with only momentum carrying me forward. It was huge, towering over us, nearly reaching the top of the buildings on either side of the streets. Walking on 3 huge, bony, sinewy legs, it strode with huge strides, each step taking it dozens of feet forward. It seemed to be composed entirely of pink, raw flesh, and at the top of the thin legs was an oblong sphere of the same terrible meat. The majority of this head was taken up by a mouth that had to be the size of a minivan, constantly opening and closing in a silent wail. Surrounding the mouth was a ring of eyeballs that were always moving in every direction, never seeming to focus on any single thing for long, as if they were trying to watch everything at once. And of course, as with all these things, there was a thick tube running out of the back, leading back off down the streets to who knows where. One of the members of the crowd noticed me staring and glanced back, shrieking when they saw the thing rapidly catching up to them. This quickly led to others noticing the thing, causing panic to rapidly spread through the crowd like an infectious disease, and chaos quickly ensuing. People began to scatter in every direction as they tried to make as much distance as possible, leading to mass confusion. The thing's eyeballs constantly tracked people as they ran, each one working independently of each other. As I watched, it raised a giant leg and speared it through a woman's torso in a single swift motion, quickly putting an end to her flailing. Her scream pierced through the air, and everyone temporarily froze, whether out of fear or sick curiosity, or perhaps both, I do not know. We all watched as the leg raised up to the mouth, bending on too many joints to facilitate such a feat. It would have been almost impressive, the way the thing balanced on two legs to do so, if it wasn't like something out of a terrible nightmare. Its gaping maw opened, and for a moment, all the eyeballs on the great and horrifying creature finally focused on a single thing: the poor woman, still screaming as she was tossed into the mouth of the beast with all the fanfare of a person eating a grape. It was only when her screams were finally cut off did the spell seem to break, and everyone resumed their panic with renewed screaming. "This way! This way!" I yelled, trying to get everyone to head to the building, and the general crowd surged in that direction, but it was nowhere near organized. People were shoving and tripping and screaming, and all the while that thing kept slamming down and picking up new victims with frightening speed. An old woman, a man who I knew had been struggling with the flu, an amputee missing a leg. All of them were speared and lifted in what couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. It was working its way back to front in an almost methodical way, which naturally led to it picking off the stragglers first. I braced myself behind the car wreck, trying to shield myself from the flood of people rushing by me in a reflection of what had happened to the man and his friend just earlier today. As I watched, I saw several members of the congregation wielding weapons run at the creature, attempting to hack and bash its legs in. However, the moment they made contact with the beast, the machetes and pipes simply became stuck within a thick film that covered its entire body, not only rendering the men as dangerous as an insect, but leading to them getting stuck like one. I saw one trying to pull his weapon out, unthinkingly pressing his hand against the creature to get leverage, leading to his arm sinking into the film. He screamed as the creature lifted its leg and he got dragged along with it, flailing like a doll held by an excited child. As he struggled, he let out a piercing scream even louder than everyone else, and I could only stand dumbfounded as the beast quickly moved its leg to the left, causing his entire body to swing with the arm as the anchor point. It was too much for the poor fool, and his arm was wrenched out of his socket, leading to him dangling from it as he passed out, presumably from the pain. This terrible sight finally pulled me out of the near hypnosis that I had been placed under. I turned and began to run, stumbling over the debris as I tried to make distance from me and the thing. I ran towards the building, hoping that it would protect me from the beast. I heard more screaming behind me, but I dared not look back, intent on getting to shelter as fast as possible. I panted heavily, out of breath like a dog that had been pushed too hard and stumbled because of it, barely able to keep one foot in front of the other. I crashed to the ground, scraping my hands on the hard pavement from trying to catch myself, pain shooting through my arms. Legs and feet stormed around me, and I shielded my face from them, trying to avoid being kicked. I screamed at them to be careful, that I was their leader and they must help me up, but nobody heard me over their own panic and terror. I curled myself into a ball to try to get as small as possible, daring to peek an eye out from beneath my arms to try to orientate myself. I had landed behind another car, this one in slightly better condition, and as I focused, I realized there was a man underneath it. He looked back at me with the same wild eyes that I was sure I was wearing right now, and with a start, I realized that I knew who he was. It was the same man who had called me out in front of everyone earlier, the one who had known that I was going back to the apartment building for my own personal revenge. He stared at me, terror in his eyes. Understandable. There was a giant monster attacking us right now. But then something strange happened. I saw his eyes flicker downwards towards my waist, just for a moment. If my adrenaline wasn't running so high, I might not have even noticed it. But I did. I glanced down at myself and saw that my shirt had been pulled up from the fall, revealing my torso, and the eye that still rested on the left of my stomach. And the eye that still rested on the left of my stomach. It felt like a splash of cold water had been thrown on my face. The rest of the world faded away, the cries and screams becoming nothing but distant noise as I slowly looked back at the man underneath the car, seeing the way that he was looking at me. His face was difficult to read, with so many emotions passing through it in mere seconds. I knew that, despite my efforts to keep a blank face, mine looked much the same way. What to do now? I really couldn't have him going and talking about this, now could I? that would undermine everything that I had been working towards. No, that wouldn't do it all. What was a girl to do then? I blink, and when I reopen my eyes, I am back at the beach, with the woman under the dying tree. The red ocean boils behind her, and I can smell the sweet scent of candy in the air. I always did have a soft spot for candy. I cannot move, as always, but as I watch, the woman takes a bite of her apple. This time, it is not night, but instead, the sun is setting, reflecting off the crimson sea. In the dying light, I see that she notices something on the fruit. She picks it off with delicate fingers, a look of disgust distorting her otherwise perfect face. She is terrifying, for a reason I cannot fully understand. She looks down at the thing in her hand, and I see that it is a caterpillar, slowly inching its way forward on her hand blindly. She throws it to the ground and stomps on it with far more strength than I would expect from someone with such a delicate-looking frame. Far in the distance, barely visible through the shine of the setting sun, I see a structure in the ocean. I blink again, and I am back on the street, the pain from the scratches on my palms confirming that this is real. I look at the man in front of me, and it all becomes very clear. There is no need to try to puzzle out what this particular vision was telling me. My leadership, their loyalty, they are my red fruit. And I am looking at the insect that is trying to eat it. Thoughts run through my mind at a mile a minute as I look at them, but finally, I stick out my hand for him to grab onto. He looks at it, confused, and I smile at him. The eye thing is pretty weird, huh? I know it's scary, but we can talk about it later. For now, we have to get out of here. It's not safe. He looks between my outstretched hand and my face, clearly confused and a little apprehensive, but finally takes it after hearing the beast take another step closer. I hold on with a firm grip and help pull him out from underneath the car, glancing back at the giant creature behind us as we stood up. It was nearly on top of us now, and it was only a short matter of time before it noticed us. I glanced around and saw that, due to being behind the car, nobody further ahead near the building could see us from their position, and those that were on this side of the vehicle were much busier focusing on running away than on what we were doing. "What are you doing? Come on, let's get out of here before that thing notices us," he said urgently, trying to pull away. However, I kept my grip tight on his arm, and didn't move. He looked back at me, confusion etched on his face before it slowly morphed into understanding. "Really? You think that I'm that dangerous to you?" he asked, and for a long moment we just stared at each other, nobody saying anything. But it didn't last. I suddenly reared back and punched him in the face, sending him stumbling backwards. I quickly picked up my pipe from the ground, where it had been dropped at some point in all the confusion, and hit him on the head with it, sending him falling backwards, gasping and bleeding. With him stunned, I didn't let up the assault, hitting him in the face, stomach, anything soft I could reach until he finally kneeled to the ground, at which point I kicked him in the back, causing him to stumble with a gasp. Panting for breath, I glanced around, making sure that nobody had noticed what had just happened. But it seemed luck was on my side, as nobody had paid us any attention in all the chaos. I looked back towards the creature, which was now nearly on top of me, towering over my field of view. I knew that I should be terrified, but I found myself feeling very little fear. I simply looked at it, taking in its monstrous form, its giant stature. Honestly, up close, it really wasn't that bad. No more terrifying than the average hobo, at least. That thought caused a bubble of laughter to swell up in my throat and escape through my mouth in a sort of strange chortle, which I quickly choked back down. This outburst caused the beast to finally notice me, with it moving swiftly to spear me with one of its giant legs. I quickly dodged out of the way, barely avoiding it as it slammed into the ground and split the pavement. I scrambled back up and started running in the opposite direction, throwing the pipe away as I attempted to make it to the building with all the strength I could muster. I heard a moan, and I glanced back, seeing the bug man slowly rising to his feet. He scarcely made it a few steps, though, before the inevitable happened and he was impaled, his screams filling the air as he was raised up to the beast's mouth. I turned away, back to the apartment building, where I saw members of my congregation waiting for me, stretching out their arms to try to get me inside before the thing made its way to us. They screamed that I was the last one. I just had to make it inside and we would be safe. I stumbled forward, moving as fast as I could, finally making it through the doorway. Warm hands grabbed me, comforted me, before finally pulling me inside, slamming the entrance behind me, cutting off the sounds of the screaming. We had made it, and I felt great. After that, we had all huddled inside, waiting with bated breath to see what the thing would do. For a long, long time it had simply stood out in the street, looking around with its many eyes. One of them, a particularly beady one, constantly watched the doorway to our building, as if waiting for us to emerge from its depths. But of course, we never did, and eventually it moved on, almost certainly to look for more wayward souls like ourselves. Taking a head count, I found that we had lost about 20 people to the creature, which, while not ideal, was a number I was willing to find acceptable. There was crying, of course, and mourning for the loss, but eventually people began to disperse out into the various rooms that were now available to them, finding it much easier to sleep on a proper bed than it was to think of those that they had left behind. I was, of course, planning to join them, but I wanted to quickly make my way to my old room, intent on taking back what was rightfully mine. But first, we had to survey my new kingdom. It was to my great chagrin that my old landlord, the old bastard, had apparently already fled and or died, as he was nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was almost no one left in the building at all, and all the few that remained I quickly managed to convince to join us, with perhaps a few intimidation tactics. We did have the numbers, after all, and everyone likes to be in a group. It makes them feel safe. But with these minor inconveniences out of the way, I called it a night and told everyone to get some well-deserved rest, much to their relief. I was feeling tired myself, but there was one more thing I had to do before I could call it a night. I went up to my old room, locking the door behind me to make sure I wasn't disturbed, especially by Hagar, who was insisting on following me around like an annoying mayfly, constantly saying my name to try and get my attention and tell me of banal things. Athalia! 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 It was an insistent buzz that I was eager to rid myself of. I sighed upon finally closing the door and locking it, relieved to have a moment to myself. Looking around the room, I saw that it was still fairly similar to how I had left it, with only a few minor changes, like some pictures being hung up by the new resident. Those could be easily fixed tomorrow. But the main draw of my attention was the long, full-size mirror propped up in the corner of the room, just how I had left it. Perfect. I quickly made my way over to it, taking off my shirt once more. The eye, of course, stared back at me, as strange and unnerving as it had been in the morning. I grimaced upon looking at it, but it was not the only thing that grabbed my attention. There, on my chest, just above my heart, a mouth silently chewed on nothing, gnashing its small teeth together. I felt as though I should be feeling a stronger emotion, more fear or disgust or something along those lines. But I found the only thing I could muster was a slight worry about it being seen. I stared at it, this aberration, with its red-rimmed maw and unclear anatomy, and the only thing I felt was exhaustion. I crawled into the bed, all of a sudden feeling as though I could sleep for 1,000 days and nights. And as I drifted off to sleep, soon to dream of the woman under the tree once more, I wondered distantly to myself if it was not just my body changing, but also my mind. But then the unconsciousness overtook me, and I dreamed of Mother, sitting under the dying tree with a canopy of night over her, and not a single star to illuminate her.